A seasoned mountain matriarch, her family vanished into the unforgiving peaks. Weeks of icy silence, shattered by a wildlife camera's chilling revelation. But the image only hinted at a darkness far more terrifying than any wilderness hazard. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss out on gripping stories like this. And let us know in the comments below what you think really happened to Liam. The wind. A mournful beast, clawed at Serpent's Peak National Park, its breath carrying the scent of an early, brutal winter. Clara Hawthorne, 67 years chiseled onto a face as weathered as the ancient pines, stepped from the rattling gondola. Her hiking boots, veterans of countless expeditions, bit into the freshly packed snow. Each step was a testament to a life lived in rhythm with these formidable Blackwood Mountains, a life now fractured by an unbearable void. It had been 3 agonizing weeks. 3 weeks since her son, Liam, his vibrant wife Sarah, and their twin 7-year-old daughters, Lily and Rose, had vanished. A weekend hike, a family tradition, twisted into a nightmare that gnawed at Clara's soul. The official search had dwindled, the sympathetic but firm pronouncements from law enforcement echoing in her mind. A tragic accident, unforgiving terrain, minimal chance of survival. But Clara, who knew these mountains like the lines on her own hand, who had spent 3 decades as a park ranger and wilderness survival guru, refused to believe it was that simple. Liam, was too experienced, too cautious to lead his family into an easily avoidable catastrophe. She trudged towards the Whispering Pines Lodge, a familiar outpost for hikers. Smoke curled from its chimney, a defiant plume against the gray, oppressive sky. Inside, Tom, the lodge clerk, a man who'd known Clara since he was a boy, trailing her on educational hikes, looked up. His usual cheerful greeting died on his lips, replaced by a somber understanding. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he began, his voice low. Any word?" Clara shook her head, the lines around her sharp, observant eyes deepening. "Not yet, Tom. That's why I'm back." She pulled a fresh stack of missing person posters from her pack. The smiling faces of Liam, Sarah, Lily in her sunshine yellow jacket, and Rose in her violet one, stared back at her, a frozen moment of happiness before the silence. "The old ones are weathered. Thought I'd replace them." "Of course. Anything," Tom said, his eagerness a small comfort. "Manager said to offer any help you need." As Clara moved through the lodge, pinning the hopeful, desperate faces to bulletin boards, the memories assaulted her. Liam's call, "Come with us, Mom. The girls miss your stories." Her prior commitment to a youth wilderness charity. A cause so dear, yet now a source of bitter regret. Next time, she'd promised, take lots of pictures. And they had. A perfect family portrait, sent midday, mountains rising majestically behind them, taken at their usual spot. Sarah had always wanted a time-lapse there, a visual record of the girls growing against the unchanging peaks. Hours later, missed calls from Liam. A terse text, "Weather turning bad. Cutting hike short. Talk later." Then, nothing. Spotty cell service was common, but as night fell, worry had metastasized into raw fear. The search began. Initially robust, fueled by community spirit. But days bled into weeks, hope eroded by blizzards, and the grim logic of survival statistics. Now, back at the main trailhead, Clara secured the last of her new posters. The wind tore at them, a physical manifestation of the forces that had likely stolen her family. As she steeled herself for another day of fruitless inquiries, a figure emerged from the dense tree line. He was a man in his 50s, clad in camouflage, an orange safety vest stark against the muted forest. A hunter, by the looks of him. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called, his breath misting in the frigid air. "Mind if I take one of those?" Clara turned, her gaze assessing. He had the look of the mountains etched into his features. "Of course," she said, handing him a poster. "Silas Vance," he introduced himself, extending a gloved hand. "Hunt these parts for nigh on 30 years. "Clara Hawthorne," she replied, shaking his hand. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "The ranger. Heard a lot about you." He studied the poster, brow furrowed. "When'd you say they went missing?" 3 weeks ago. Almost a month now." Silas reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, rugged device. "You know, I set up trail cams. For tracking game." "Maybe." Clara's heart, a leaden weight in her chest for weeks, suddenly leaped. "You think? You might have caught something?" Silas didn't answer immediately, his attention fixed on the device's screen, scrolling through images. His movements slowed, his finger hovering. Then he looked up, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, his voice gravelly, "I think you need to see this." He turned the device. The footage was grainy, the forest shrouded in an ethereal mist. But there, moving with a desperate caution, were three figures. A woman with dark, shoulder-length hair, and two small children. The woman wore a light-colored jacket coral, perhaps in the children. Yellow and lavender. "That's them," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "That's Sarah and the twins." Her gaze locked onto the timestamp in the corner. It was dated just 3 days ago. 3 days, they were alive. A dizzying wave of relief and renewed terror washed over her. "But where's Liam? My son should be with them." Silas Vance zoomed in on the grainy image, the quality pushing the limits of the trail camera's resolution. "It's a fixed camera, Mrs. Hawthorne. Only catches what passes directly in front. He could have been lagging, or taken a slightly different path. No way to tell from this alone." Clara stared, her mind racing, a maelstrom of emotions. Alive. 3 days ago, hope, sharp and painful, pierced through the fog of her grief. They looked exhausted, their movements furtive, like hunted animals. At one point, Sarah had glanced almost directly towards the hidden lens, her face a mask of strain, before hurrying the children on. "Where?" Clara demanded, urgency tightening her voice. "Where exactly was this taken?" Silas pulled up a GPS map on his device, his finger tapping a blinking red dot. "Here, deep in the northern section, about 8 miles from where we're standing. Terrain's brutal up there. Unmarked ravines, avalanche chutes. Not a place for a casual hike, especially with kids." Clara's blood ran cold. "That's outside the official search zone. The police deemed it too dangerous. No maintained trails." "Exactly," Silas affirmed. "Not where you'd expect a family to be, which is why no one looked there. I need a copy of this footage, Silas. Now, I have to show it to Detective Harding." Silas nodded, already working the device. "Emailing it to you. And here," he scribbled on a notepad, "is my number. I know those northern reaches. Call if you need anything." "Thank you," Clara choked out, emotion overwhelming her. This is the first real lead." "Hope it helps," Silas said, a shadow crossing his face. "Hope you find them all safe." He shouldered his pack. "Gotta head down. Got what I came for." He gestured towards his hunting gear. "You be all right?" "Yes," Clara said, clutching her phone, the precious video file transferring. "I'm going to my cabin, calling the police immediately." They walked back towards the lodge in a charged silence. Clara's mind already miles away, plotting, planning. Her family was alive. The police had to restart the search. The moment she was inside her rented cabin, her fingers, trembling slightly, dialed Detective Harding's number. "Harding?" The curt voice answered. "Detective, it's Clara Hawthorne. I have evidence. My family, they're alive." She quickly recounted her encounter with Silas, the footage, the location. "I'm sending you the video now. You need to see this. We have to restart the search, immediately." There was a pause, as Harding presumably reviewed the footage. Clara paced the small cabin, the 4 walls suddenly feeling like a cage. Outside, the late afternoon light was already beginning to surrender to the encroaching dusk. Darkness fell swiftly in the Blackwood Mountains at this time of year. "This does appear to be your daughter-in-law and granddaughters, Mrs. Hawthorne," Harding conceded, his tone cautious. "However, we can't mount a search operation this late in the day." "What do you mean?" Clara's voice rose, incredulous. "They're out there. Right now." "I understand your urgency," Harding replied, his voice maddeningly calm. "But as a former ranger, you know the dangers of nighttime operations in that kind of terrain. The area Silas Vance indicated is particularly treacherous. We're forecasting more snow tonight. We'd be risking more lives." Clara knew he was right. She'd led enough rescues, made enough hard calls herself. The protocols were there for a reason. "Helicopters?" she pressed, grasping. "Not in these conditions, and certainly not at night. Besides," Harding added, "from this footage, they don't appear to be in immediate, critical distress." They're moving with purpose. She sank into a chair, the weight of frustration crushing. So close. So, we wait until morning? First light, Harding confirmed. I'll coordinate with park authorities tonight. We'll assemble teams, plan the safest approach. I promise, Mrs. Hawthorne, we'll do everything possible. He paused. Given your experience, your presence on the team would be valuable. Be at the ranger station. 600 hours. After the call, Clara stared at the frozen image on her phone. Sarah, Lily, Rose, alive. But something felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. Where was Liam? Silas's explanation was plausible, but it didn't sit right with Clara's intimate knowledge of her son. Liam would never ever separate from his family in such hostile territory, especially with the twins. He was their protector, their anchor. And why that specific area? It was far from their usual haunts, a zone Daniel knew was perilous. He wouldn't have led them there without a desperate, compelling reason. The questions swirled, unanswered, deepening her unease. She watched the last vestiges of daylight bleed from the sky, the first snowflakes beginning their silent, inexorable descent. Somewhere up there, in the gathering dark, her family faced another night in the unforgiving wilderness. "Hold on," she whispered to the frosted window pane, her breath a fleeting cloud. "Just hold on." The cabin felt suffocating. She hadn't eaten since morning. It was 6:30 p.m. The thought of being alone with her churning thoughts was unbearable. Bundling up, she headed to the lodge's main hall for the communal dinner. The snowfall intensified, heavy flakes swirling in the lamplight. Inside the lodge, the warmth and chatter felt alien, a discordant note in her symphony of anxiety. She grabbed some instant noodles and hot water, finding a seat at the edge of the room. Two older men nearby were talking, their voices carrying in a lull. "That's Clara Hawthorne, isn't it?" one said. "The wealthy one. Donated all that money to the Wilderness Education Foundation last month, and now this. Tragic." "If it were my family," the other rumbled, unaware Clara could hear, "I'd be out there right now. Storm be damned." The words struck Clara like a physical blow. Storm be damned. Would Liam wait until morning if it were her, lost and alone on that mountain? The answer was a resounding, unequivocal no. A new, fierce resolve solidified within her. She forced down a few mouthfuls of noodles and slipped out, unnoticed. Back in her cabin, she moved with grim purpose. Her best gear, her old search and rescue pack, meticulously organized, a relic of her past, now a tool for her present. Thermal layers, waterproof shell, reinforced boots, GPS with offline maps, Cal's coordinates already marked, extra batteries, energy bars, sub-zero sleeping bag. A small voice of caution whispered of recklessness, of her age, the treacherous terrain, the worsening weather. But a louder voice, the voice of a mother, the voice of a ranger who knew every hour counted, drowned it out. If anyone could navigate these mountains in these conditions, it was her. She slipped out, avoiding main paths, headlamp off until she reached the trailhead. "Northwest," Cal had said, away from maintained trails, into the raw, untamed wilderness. It would be a monumental challenge even in daylight. In this blizzard, under the cloak of night, it would test every fiber of her being. But her family was out there, and she was going to find them. Switching on her headlamp, she took a deep, fortifying breath of the icy air and began her ascent. The beam of Clara's headlamp cut a narrow swath through the swirling snow, a fragile beacon in an ocean of darkness. Each upward step was an act of will, her breath pluming in the frigid air, the crunch of her boots the only sound besides the wind's relentless howl through the pines. The lodge, with its deceptive warmth and light, faded behind her, swallowed by the storm. The terrain grew steeper, the path less a trail and more a suggestion, a memory of animal tracks now buried under a fresh blanket of white. She checked her GPS constantly, the small screen, a lifeline to orientation in the disorienting blizzard. 2 hours in, the snowfall was a suffocating curtain, visibility reduced to mere feet. Time dissolved into a rhythm of exertion and navigation, of pushing forward against the elements and her own mounting fatigue. The temperature plummeted. The wind, armed with ice crystals, stung any exposed skin. Her lips felt numb. Her fingers, despite insulated gloves, ached with a deep, gnawing cold. She was approaching her limit. The stark realization settled in. If conditions worsened, Or if she didn't find shelter soon, she'd be forced to make an emergency camp, to hunker down and pray the storm broke before hypothermia claimed her. She began scanning for a suitable spot. A rock overhang, a dense thicket of firs, anything to offer a modicum of protection. It was then, as she was mentally rehearsing the steps for constructing a snow cave, that a faint, almost imperceptible glow pricked the darkness to her right. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of exhaustion, her mind conjuring phantoms in the white chaos. But as she pushed cautiously forward, her snowshoes sinking deep, the glow resolved itself. A window. A sliver of light spilling from a structure nestled amongst the trees, almost invisible until she was nearly upon it. A cabin, here in this remote, forsaken stretch of the Blackwood Mountains. Hope, potent and electrifying, surged through Clara's weary limbs. Shelter, at the very least. And perhaps, just perhaps, answers. She approached with the caution of a seasoned tracker, her headlamp illuminating a small, sturdy log cabin, its roofline softened by a heavy mantle of snow. Smoke, thin but undeniable, curled from a stone chimney. Someone was inside. Her hand, trembling, from cold, from anticipation she couldn't tell, reached out and knocked on the rough-hewn wooden door. Silence, save for the wind. She knocked again, louder this time, her voice hoarse. "Hello! Is anyone there? Please, I need help!" The silence stretched, taut and unnerving. Just as she was about to knock a third time, a hinge creaked. The door opened a fraction, then wider. Clara's breath hitched. Staring back at her, her expression a mixture of disbelief and something unreadable, was Serafina. Her daughter-in-law, whom she'd last seen in a smiling photograph, now stood before her, gaunt and haunted, but undeniably real. For a frozen moment, neither woman moved, the only sound the hiss of the snow. Then Sarah seemed to jolt back to life. "Clara? How? What are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice raspy, pulling Clara inside, out of the storm's brutal embrace. The sudden warmth of the cabin was a shock to Clara's system. Before she could fully process the reunion, small voices called from deeper within the single room. "Mommy? Who is it?" Two small figures, wrapped in blankets, peered from behind a makeshift barricade of chairs. Lily and Rose. Their eyes, wide and luminous in the dim light of a kerosene lamp, fixed on Clara. Recognition dawned. "Grandma Clara!" they cried in unison, a sound that melted the ice around Clara's heart. They rushed forward, then stopped short, a sudden shyness, or perhaps a deeper uncertainty, holding them back. Clara sank to her knees, overcome. The warmth was seeping into her frozen extremities, sending agonizing pins and needles through her hands and feet, but it was nothing compared to the tidal wave of relief. They were alive. Her granddaughters were alive. Sarah moved quickly to a small rustic kitchen area, returning with a steaming mug. "Here, drink this. You're half frozen." It was reconstituted powdered milk, but to Clara it tasted like nectar. As Clara sipped, Sarah gently ushered the twins back towards a rough pallet bed in the corner. "It's late, girls. Back to bed. Grandma Clara is tired and needs to warm up. You can talk to her tomorrow." Reluctantly, Lily and Rose shuffled back, their eyes still fixed on Clara. Sarah handed them each a small cup of the warm milk. After they'd gulped it down, she tucked them in, murmuring something soft that drew sleepy giggles. "Good night, Grandma Clara," Lily whispered, her voice already thick with sleep. Rose echoed her, a yawn cracking her words. Within minutes, their breathing evened out, soft and rhythmic. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a torrent of questions. But one, the most pressing, clawed its way to the surface. Clara kept her voice low, mindful of the sleeping children. "Sarah," she said, her gaze locking with her daughter, in-laws. "Where's Liam?" Sarah's face, already pale, seemed to drain of all remaining color. The light in her eyes flickered and died, replaced by a profound, shadowed grief. She moved to a small wooden table in the center of the room and sank onto a stool, gesturing for Clara to join her. The simple cabin, though a haven from the storm, suddenly felt charged with unspoken words, heavy with an invisible weight. Clara lowered herself onto the opposite stool, the warmth of the mug a small comfort in the face of the dread coiling in her stomach. This was it, the moment of truth, or so she hoped. The cabin was Spartan but functional. A single room, efficiently arranged, The small wood stove radiated a welcome heat, its surface doubling as a cooktop. Shelves along one wall held a surprising array of supplies: canned goods, bottled water, basic tools, and a stack of neatly folded blankets. The air smelled of wood smoke, damp wool, and the faint, lingering scent of fear. Clara cradled the warm mug, her eyes fixed on Sarah. "Sarah," she pressed gently, "what happened? Where is my son?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, spilling onto her chapped cheeks. She stared down at her own mug, turning it slowly between her palms. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, fractured by grief. "We had an accident, Clara. That day, the storm, it came on so fast. We didn't check the forecast properly, Liam. He thought we could beat it." "But why were you up here?" Clara's voice was calm, but an icy tendril of unease was tightening around her heart. "This area, it's marked as hazardous. Liam knows these mountains. He would never bring the children into this zone intentionally." Sarah bit her lip, her gaze darting towards the sleeping twins. "He wanted to try something different. A new path, the girls. They were getting a bit bored with the usual trails. He thought we'd just explore a little, stay on the lower slopes. But then the storm hit with such ferocity. Going back seemed more dangerous than pressing forward, trying to find shelter." She paused, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "We were so lucky to find this cabin. It saved our lives that first night." Clara nodded slowly. A sudden, violent storm could disorient even experienced hikers. Finding shelter would have been paramount. But the core question remained, a throbbing ache in her chest. "And Liam?" she prompted, her voice gentle but insistent. Sarah's face crumpled. For a moment, she seemed unable to speak, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When she finally found her voice, it was broken, raw with pain. The next morning, when the snow had eased a little, Liam said he would hike out to get help. He thought if he could just reach an area with cell service or find a ranger station. Her voice trailed off, lost in the abyss of her sorrow. I waited. Hours turned into a day. Then, another storm moved in, worse than the first. Her eyes, haunted, met Clara's. I couldn't leave the girls alone to go looking for him. A dreadful premonition settled over Clara. Did you ever find him?" Sarah shook her head, tears flowing freely now. After the second storm passed, I tried. I searched the nearby area as much as I dared with the twins. But I couldn't go far, and then more bad weather rolled in. We've been trapped here, Clara, waiting for conditions to improve enough to try and make it back to the main trails. Clara's heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. "So, Daniel is—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. "I don't know for certain," Sarah admitted, her voice barely audible. "But it's been 3 weeks, Clara. 3 weeks. I've had to accept that he—" She covered her face with her hands, her body racked with grief. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Sarah's muffled sobs. Clara reached out, placing a hand on her daughter-in Law's trembling shoulder. The loss was a shared agony, a wound that cut them both deep. After a moment, Clara asked the question that had been nagging at her since she'd seen the footage. "The girls, do they know?" Sarah lowered her hands, composing herself with visible effort. They figured it out eventually. They're smart, Clara, always asking questions. By the second week, they knew something was terribly wrong. I had to tell them that Daddy might not be coming back. Clara glanced towards the small bed where her granddaughters slept, their innocent faces peaceful in the dim lamplight. The thought of them processing such devastating news, of their small hearts grappling with such immense loss, was unbearable. "But why did you stay here?" Clara asked, turning back to Sarah, a new thread of inquiry forming in her mind. "It's been 3 weeks. Surely there were breaks in the weather, moments when you could have tried to make it back down, even a short distance, to a more frequented area?" Sarah's expression grew haunted, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "I was afraid, Clara, maybe if it was just me, I might have risked it. But with the twins—" After losing Liam, she shook her head, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I couldn't bear the thought of something happening to them too. So, we stayed. We used the supplies we found here. Clara rose from her chair, a sudden restlessness compelling her to move. She walked to the kitchen area, her ranger instincts, honed over decades, kicking in. She examined the shelves more closely. Most of the food was canned, beans, soups, vegetables, but there were also packages of dried meat, jerky, and several cartons of UHT milk that looked surprisingly new, not something one would expect to find in a long-abandoned hunting cabin. "These supplies, Sierra," Clara said, picking up one of the milk cartons, turning it over in her hand. "They don't look like they've been sitting here for years." "No," Sarah agreed, her voice quiet. I think someone uses this cabin regularly. A hunter, perhaps. They must have restocked it recently. There's enough here to last us a while longer if need be." Clara set the milk down, a knot of unease tightening in her gut. She moved to dispose of her empty mug in a small waste bin near the door. As she did, something glinted in the dim light. A flash of metal beneath a loose floorboard, right by the threshold. Crouching down, she examined the area more closely. "There's something under here," she murmured, more to herself than to Sarah. Sarah quickly stood, moving towards her. "What is it?" Clara worked her fingers into the narrow gap between the boards. The floorboard came up easily, too easily, revealing a small, shallow space beneath. There, nestled in the dust and grime, lay a man's ring, a wedding band, gold, with a distinctive Trinity knot inlay. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she lifted it out. The ring was clean, almost polished, unmarred by the scratches or dirt one might expect if it had been lost beneath a floor for any significant length of time. This was Liam's wedding ring, her son's ring. Her voice was hollow, with a dawning, terrible disbelief. "This is Liam's." Sarah stared at it, her expression unreadable for a fleeting second before she reached for it, her hand surprisingly steady. "It must have slipped off his finger that first night," she said quickly, her voice a little too bright. "We were all so cold, our hands were numb, it probably fell through the crack without him even noticing." Clara handed her the ring, watching as Sarah slipped it onto her own thumb for safekeeping. The explanation was plausible, but something about it, about Sarah's composure, didn't sit right. It felt rehearsed. The cabin, the supplies, the ring, pieces of a puzzle that weren't fitting together. Not yet. Clara's gaze swept around the small cabin again, her senses heightened, every detail now scrutinized under a lens of burgeoning suspicion. The substantial pile of neatly chopped firewood stacked by the door, far more than one would expect for a sporadically used abandoned shelter. Enough for weeks, not days. And the cabinet behind Sarah, slightly ajar, revealing not just tins, but what looked like recently purchased packets of biscuits and dried fruit. "Sarah," Clara said slowly, her voice carefully neutral. "If this cabin is truly abandoned, why is there so much firewood? And those supplies? Some of them look brand new, as if someone restocked them very recently." A flicker of something? Alarm? Guilt? Crossed Sarah's face. So fleeting Clara almost missed it, but it was there. Sarah composed herself quickly. "I told you, Clara. I think someone uses it regularly. A hunter. Maybe they've been by since we've been here. And they didn't see us? Didn't offer help?" Sarah's voice was laced with a defensive edge. "We hide when we hear anyone approaching," she explained, her eyes avoiding Clara's. "After everything that's happened, I didn't know who to trust." Clara nodded, but the explanation felt thin, a flimsy patch over a gaping hole. Why would a benevolent hunter restock a cabin and not report finding a mother and 2 children in distress? Why would Sarah, desperate for rescue, hide from potential saviors? The pieces were not just failing to fit, they were actively repelling each other, hinting at a picture far more disturbing than accidental tragedy. She turned back towards the kitchen area, intending to press further, to dismantle Sarah's increasingly fragile narrative, when a sudden movement in her peripheral vision registered, a blur of motion. In the split second before an explosion of agonizing pain erupted across the back of her head, Clara saw Sarah. Her daughter-in-law, her face contorted into a mask of desperate fury, arms raised high, the heavy butt of a hunting shotgun, where had that come from? Clutched in her hands, arcing downwards. Then, darkness, utter, complete, and terrifyingly silent. Consciousness returned in jagged, painful fragments. First, the throbbing in her skull, a relentless, nauseating pulse of agony radiating from the base of her neck. Then, an awareness of biting cold, her extremities numb despite being inside the cabin. Finally, a smell, acrid, chemical, cloying, that made her throat constrict and her eyes water. She forced her eyelids open, blinking against the disorientation. The cabin was dim, the fire in the stove reduced to dying embers that cast long, dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Through the grime-streaked windows, she could see the storm had passed, revealing a clear, star-dusted night sky. When she tried to move, a fresh wave of panic surged through her. Her arms, her legs, they wouldn't respond. Looking down, her heart hammered against her ribs. She was bound tightly to the wooden chair she'd been sitting on, coarse rope biting into her wrists and ankles, cutting off circulation. The chemical smell was stronger now, making her cough, gag, gas, propane, leaking somewhere in the cabin. Her gaze darted wildly around the room, searching for Sarah, for Lily and Rose. The small pallet bed in the corner was empty, the blankets thrown aside. No one else was in the cabin. The horrifying realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Sarah had done this. Attacked her, tied her up, and left her in a cabin rapidly filling with flammable gas, with a smoldering fire in the stove that would, inevitably, act as an ignition source. Sarah meant for her to die here, to burn, to become another tragic statistic of the unforgiving Blackwood Mountains. But why? The question burned as fiercely as the pain in her head, but there was no time to dwell on it. Survival. That was all that mattered. She took stock. The ropes were tight, amateurishly tied perhaps, but brutally effective. The chair, though old, was solid, rocking. She began to rock the chair, small, cautious movements at first, testing its stability. Each motion sent fresh waves of agony through her injured head, but she pushed through it, fueled by a desperate, primal instinct. The gas smell was overpowering now, making her head swim. With a sudden, violent lurch, she threw her weight sideways, toppling the chair. The impact jarred her skull, stars exploding behind her eyelids, but she felt a satisfying crack as one of the chair legs splintered. Encouraged, she repeated the motion, slamming the chair against the wooden floor again and again. The legs snapped, the broken wood creating just enough give in the chair's structure, just enough slack in the ropes. Her bound hands, stiff with cold and lack of circulation, fumbled towards her pocket. Agonizing seconds stretched into an eternity before her numb fingers closed around the familiar shape of the small folding knife she always carried, a habit from her ranger days. Opening it one-handed, while bound, was a Herculean task, demanding every ounce of her failing dexterity. The blade finally clicked into place. She began sawing at the ropes around her wrists, her movements frantic but precise, careful not to cut herself too deeply in the process. The gas was a suffocating presence now. Near the fireplace, a small ember, disturbed by her violent movements, flared. It caught on a stray piece of kindling, a soft whoosh. Fire. Blooming, hungry, near the stove. The rope around one wrist gave way just as the first greedy flames began to race across the wooden floorboards, licking towards the kitchen area, towards the source of the leaking gas. She worked faster, her breath coming in ragged gasps, freeing her other wrist, then frantically untying her ankles. Standing made her dizzy, the world tilting precariously, but adrenaline, potent and raw, propelled her forward. She stumbled to the door, yanking at the handle. Locked. Bolted from the outside, or jammed. The fire was spreading with terrifying speed, consuming the aged, dry wood with an insatiable hunger. Grabbing one of the remaining firewood logs, a desperate last-ditch weapon, Clara lurched towards the nearest window. The glass was old, single-paned, vulnerable. With a grunt of pure, unadulterated effort, she swung the log. The glass cracked, spiderwebbing, but held. A second, more desperate blow shattered it, sending shards flying outwards into the snow-covered darkness. She used the log to clear the remaining jagged edges from the frame, ignoring the fresh cuts that opened on her hands. Behind her, the fire reached the kitchen. A terrifying whoosh of displaced air, a sudden, intense wave of heat that singed the hair at the nape of her neck and physically pushed her forward. The gas had found its spark. No hesitation. Clara scrambled through the narrow window frame, the sharp edges of broken glass tearing at her clothes, slicing into her leg. She fell. heavily, into the deep, soft snow outside, the frigid air, a shocking, life-affirming contrast to the inferno raging behind her. Rolling away from the burning cabin, she watched, breathless, as flames engulfed the structure, painting the night sky with an orange, malevolent glow. The welcoming light she'd seen through the storm, the shelter that had briefly promised reunion, was now revealed as the deadly trap it had become. Her pack, her GPS, her means of communication, all burning inside. She was alone, injured, stripped of her gear, in the heart of the wilderness. But she was alive. The inferno that had been the cabin roared behind her, a funeral pyre for her brief, rekindled hope, and she now understood with chilling certainty for her son, Liam. If Sarah was capable of this, of leaving her own mother-in-law to die in such a horrific manner, then her story about Liam venturing out for help was a monstrous lie. Sarah had killed him. The thought was a fresh stab of agony, sharper than any physical pain. Clara staggered to her feet, wincing as a searing pain shot through her leg from the gash the window glass had inflicted. The night was brilliantly clear now, the storm having exhausted itself, leaving behind a pristine, star-drenched sky. She oriented herself using Polaris, the North Star, a steadfast friend from her ranger days. The Whispering Pines Lodge lay to the west, a daunting multi-hour trek through unfamiliar, snow-laden terrain without proper gear. But before she could take a single step in that direction, a sound, faint and fragile, pierced the cold, still air. A child's voice, high-pitched, laced with fear, calling out from somewhere deeper in the forest. "Mommy? Mommy, where are you?" Lily or Rose? Forgetting her own injuries, her exhaustion, the gnawing grief, Clara moved towards the sound, her feet sinking into the deep, powdery snow. The voice came again, clearer this time, heartbreakingly vulnerable. "It hurts! Mommy, it hurts!" She pushed through a dense stand of snow-heavy pines, following the cries, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She emerged into a small, moonlit clearing. There, huddled against a jagged rock outcropping, a small figure in a violet jacket, Rose, sat, one leg extended at an unnatural, sickening angle. "Rose?" Clara called softly, approaching slowly, not wanting to frighten the child further. The girl looked up, her small face streaked with tears, pale and pinched in the ethereal moonlight. "Grandma, Clara?" Relief, confusion, and pain warred in her eyes. "It hurts," she whimpered, gesturing to her leg. "My leg really, really hurts." Clara knelt beside her granddaughter, her touch gentle as she carefully examined the injury. Even in the dim starlight, she could see the severe swelling around Rose's ankle, broken, or a very bad sprain. "What happened, sweetheart?" Clara asked, her voice a low murmur as she carefully removed her own scarf, preparing to fashion a makeshift splint. "Where's your mom? Where's Lily?" Rose sniffled, fresh tears welling. "I fell, down the steep hill. Mommy tried to help me, but then she said we had to keep going." The child's voice broke, a sob escaping her. She said something about a sacrifice. Her small face crumpled, and then she took Lily's hand, and they left me here. She said to be quiet. Rage, cold and pure, unlike anything Clara had ever experienced, flooded through her. Sarah hadn't just abandoned an injured child in the wilderness. She'd abandoned her own daughter in freezing temperatures that would have undoubtedly claimed her life before morning. This wasn't just murder. It was an act of unimaginable cruelty. "I'm here now, Rose Petal," Clara said, her voice remarkably calm, a deliberate effort to soothe the terrified child. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe." With practiced movements, honed by years of wilderness first aid, she carefully secured the splint around Rose's injured ankle, using sturdy branches broken from a nearby fir and her scarf to immobilize the joint. Then, gritting her teeth against the pain in her own injured leg and the throbbing in her head, she lifted the child into her arms, cradling her against her chest. Rose, light as a feather, yet carrying the weight of the world's sorrows. "It's going to be okay," Clara promised, her voice a fierce vow against the silent, indifferent mountains. She turned, orienting herself once more towards what she prayed was the path back to civilization. "Hold on tight, sweetheart. We have a long walk ahead of us." Rose wrapped her thin arms around Clara's neck, her small body shivering uncontrollably with cold and shock. Despite her own injuries, her profound exhaustion, Clara found new reserves of strength, a primal maternal power surging through her. Each step was an agony, carrying her precious, fragile cargo. She had no equipment, no map, an injured child to protect, and a murderer on the loose with her other granddaughter. But she had decades of experience etched into her muscle memory, and an iron will that would not, could not, yield. The journey down the mountain was a grueling, nightmarish test of endurance. Every muscle in Clara's body screamed for rest, her head throbbed with a relentless rhythm, and her injured legs sent jolts of fire with every step. But she pushed forward. Rose's small, trusting weight in her arms, a constant, driving impetus. The child had fallen into a fitful, whimpering sleep, pain occasionally breaking through her exhaustion. Clara navigated by starlight and an almost preternatural sense of the land, choosing the gentler slopes where possible, carefully picking her way around unseen obstacles in the deep snow. Each footfall required intense concentration. A fall now, in their current state, could be catastrophic. Hours crawled by, marked only by the slow, silent procession of stars across the inky canvas of the sky. As the eastern horizon began to pale with the first tentative brushstrokes of dawn, Clara caught glimpses of familiar landmarks through the thinning trees. They were approaching the maintained trails. They were going to make it. "Rose," she said softly, her voice raspy, rousing the child. "Look, sweetie, we're almost there." Rose stirred, blinking groggily, her face pale and drawn, but a flicker of something, hope, ignited in her eyes when she saw the distant, reassuring shape of a trail marker. Is Mommy there?" she asked, her voice small, uncertain. The question, so innocent, so heartbreaking, caught Clara off guard. How could she explain to a 7-year-old the monstrous truth? That her mother had tried to kill her grandmother, had almost certainly murdered her father, and had abandoned her, Rose, to die in the snow? "I don't know, sweetheart," Clara answered, the lie a bitter taste in her mouth, yet a necessary shield for now. "But there are people there who can help us, and that's what matters right now." The final stretch of their journey took them past the outlying silent cabins and towards the central hub of the Whispering Pines Lodge. As they emerged from the tree line, Clara could see early morning hikers, their colorful gear stark against the snow, staff members already preparing for the day. Summoning her last tattered reserves of strength, she called out, her voice cracking, "Help! We need help here! My granddaughter is injured!" Heads turned. A moment of shocked stillness, then people began running towards them, their faces etched with concern and alarm. Clara's legs, battered and abused, finally gave out. She sank to her knees in the snow, still cradling Rose protectively, the world tilting and swaying around her. Darkness threatened at the edges of her vision, but she fought it back. She had to stay conscious. For Rose, for Liam, for Lily. Hands reached for them, voices a blur of concern. "Get medical assistance," someone shouted, "and call the manager! Call Detective Harding!" Clara felt herself being gently helped to her feet, while other, careful hands took Rose from her trembling arms. The warmth of the lodge's foyer enveloped them like a comforting blanket as they were guided inside, the familiar scent of wood smoke and coffee, a stark contrast to the icy wilderness they'd just escaped. "It's Clara Hawthorne," she heard someone exclaim. "And one of the missing children." Tom, the lodge clerk, rushed forward, his face a mask of shock and relief as he recognized her. "Mrs. Hawthorne? What happened? How?" "Call the police," Clara interrupted, her voice raspy but firm, cutting through the surrounding babble. "It's Serafina. She tried to kill me. She attacked me, left me for dead in a burning cabin. She abandoned Rose, injured, in the snow. She has Lily." A hushed, stunned silence fell over the gathered crowd. Some, Clara noticed with a detached weariness, had already begun recording the scene on their phones. Privacy was a luxury she could no longer afford. "We need to warm them up," the lodge manager said, recovering his composure quickly. "And the child needs immediate medical attention." They were guided to the large stone fireplace in the main room. Blankets appeared as if by magic, wrapped around their shoulders. A staff member with first aid training began examining Rose's injured leg, her touch gentle but efficient, while another brought steaming mugs of sweet tea. "Mrs. Hawthorne," the manager said, crouching beside her, his voice low and urgent. "The gondola operators. They reported seeing a woman with a child very early this morning, descending the mountain. They weren't certain, but they thought it might have been your daughter-in-law." "With Lily," Clara finished for him, her heart sinking. If Sarah had already made it down the gondola, she could be anywhere by now, disappearing with her remaining captive. Which way were they heading? Down the mountain. Apparently they moved quickly. Didn't stop to talk to anyone. The distant wail of sirens announced the arrival of emergency services. Within minutes, the lodge was filled with police officers and paramedics. Rose was carefully transferred to a stretcher, paramedics expertly stabilizing her leg and checking her vital signs. "I want to stay with my granddaughter," Clara insisted, her grip tightening on Rose's small hand as they prepared to move her. "Of course, ma'am," one of the paramedics assured her. "We'll transport you both to the hospital in Silver Creek." As they were being loaded into the medical helicopter, the quickest way to reach the nearest well-equipped hospital, Detective Harding approached, his expression grim. "Mrs. Hawthorne, we need to take a statement from you as soon as possible. We've already received conflicting information." "Conflicting? What do you mean?" Clara asked, her head throbbing, exhaustion threatening to pull her under. "A woman identifying herself as Seraphina Thorne was brought to the Silver Creek General Hospital earlier this morning by a local man, Silas Vance. He claimed he found her and a child, Lily, presumably, at the park's main entrance, distressed and suffering from exposure." Harding paused, his gaze steady. "She's made some very serious allegations against you, Mrs. Hawthorne." Clara stared at the detective, disbelief warring with a fresh surge of cold fury. "Allegations? Against me?" "She claims you tracked them to a cabin where they'd been sheltering since Liam's disappearance. According to her statement, when you learned Liam was presumed dead, you became unhinged, enraged. She alleges you attempted to harm her and the children, and that she acted in self-defense to protect Lily, and that you accidentally started the fire during the struggle." "That's absurd!" Clara's voice, though weak, was filled with indignation. "She attacked me. She knocked me unconscious, left me to die in that cabin." She abandoned Rose with a broken leg in freezing temperatures. "Silas Vance, he was there, wasn't he? At the cabin earlier? His trail camera?" Harding nodded, making notes. "Mr. Vance is also at the hospital. We'll need formal statements from all parties, and from Rose, when she's able." "Her name is Rose," Clara said firmly, "and she needs medical attention far more than you need her statement right now." "Of course. We'll meet you at the hospital." The officer stepped back as the helicopter doors were secured. As they lifted off, the majestic, snow-covered peaks of the Blackwood Mountains falling away beneath them, Clara held tight to Rose's hand. In just a few short, terrifying hours, she had found her family, lost her son all over again, and nearly died at the hands of the woman he had married. And now that same woman was attempting to twist the narrative, to paint Clara, the rescuer, as the villain. The thought of Sarah holding Lily, potentially poisoning the child's mind against her own grandmother and twin sister, made Clara's blood boil. At the hospital, the corridor bustled. Ellie was treated for a mild concussion, lacerations, and hypothermia, then sat vigil outside radiology while Rose underwent X-rays. A police officer stood discreetly nearby. Soon the elevator doors opened, and Silas Vance stepped out, his face grave. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, nodding to the officer, "I heard. I'm glad you and the little one are safe." He hesitated. "I need to talk to you, to the police. There's something I have to tell you both." Before Clara could respond, a doctor emerged. "Mrs. Hawthorne, your granddaughter's X-rays show a clean break to the tibia. She'll need surgery to set the bone." After signing consent forms and reassuring a brave Rose, Clara returned to find Silas and Harding, along with another officer, waiting. They moved to a small consultation room. Once the door closed, Silas took a deep, ragged breath. "First, I'm sorry for all of this." He looked directly at Clara, his eyes filled with a profound weariness. "What I have to tell you, it's not easy." "Just tell us the truth, Silas," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. He nodded grimly. 3 weeks ago, I found them. Sarah, Liam, and the twins. They were already in my cabin, my hunting cabin. It's not on any official maps. Built it myself, years ago." Clara's eyes widened. "His cabin, Liam said they got caught in that first big storm, Silas continued, his voice low. Ventured too far off trail, couldn't make it back. I let them stay. The girls were exhausted, scared. Liam promised they'd head down once the weather cleared and the girls were rested. He paused, visibly struggling. I left them there that evening, intended to head back to the lodge myself. But the weather, it turned again. Vicious. Hail, lightning. I was about halfway back to my cabin to check on them when I heard the girls screaming. The room was utterly still. I followed the sounds, Silas choked out, his gaze fixed on a point beyond the wall. Up near the Widow's Leap, and I saw Serafina. She and Liam were arguing, right on the cliff edge. Then she pushed him. He just disappeared over the side. The twins, they were nearby, hiding behind some rocks, crying. Sarah was yelling at them to stay put. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled gasp escaping her. Liam, murdered. The suspicion she'd harbored, now a horrifying, confirmed reality. "Why didn't you report this immediately?" Harding demanded, his voice sharp. Silas's shoulders slumped. "Sarah saw me. She knew I'd witnessed it. I was scared. For myself. For the kids, too, what she might do. We went back to the cabin, and that's when she made me an offer." He couldn't meet Clara's eyes. She said Liam had a substantial life insurance policy. $2 million. She'd get it if his death was ruled an accident. She offered me a cut. A big one, if I helped her. Helped them stay hidden, brought them supplies, let it look like they were all lost, and then found them weeks later, after Liam was long gone, presumed dead from the elements. Said she'd say he went for help and never came back. "And you agreed?" Clara whispered, her voice hollow. "I'm ashamed to say I did," Silas admitted, his face ashen. "For 3 weeks I brought them food, firewood, kept them hidden. But seeing you, Mrs. Hawthorne, your posters. Hearing those little girls cry for their daddy at night, it ate at me. Then, this morning, I overheard Sarah on a satellite phone, one I'd lent her for emergencies, talking to someone, a lawyer maybe. She was planning to spin a story, to make it sound like I might have had something to do with Liam's disappearance if questions were asked, to ensure she got all the money. That's when I knew I couldn't be part of it anymore. When I saw her leaving the mountain with only one child, I knew something else terrible had happened. I found her at the park entrance with Lily, and I called the police. And I told them a version of the truth that implicated you, to protect myself initially. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hawthorne. I was a coward. She killed my son, Clara stated, the words like shards of glass. And you helped her cover it up. I know, Silas said, tears welling in his eyes, and I'll face whatever's coming to me. I couldn't live with it anymore. Detective Harding's voice cut through the heavy silence in the small consultation room. Mr. Vance, you are under arrest as an accessory after the fact to homicide and for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. As another officer read Silas his rights and placed him in handcuffs, Silas looked at Clara one last time. For what it's worth, Mrs. Hawthorne, I truly am sorry. If I hadn't come forward even as late and as muddled as I did, you might never have known the full truth, or found Rose when you did. Clara stared at him, a maelstrom of emotions churning within her, fury at his complicity, disgust at his greed, yet a grudging acknowledgement that his eventual, albeit self-serving, confession had been crucial. You're right about one thing, Silas, she said, her voice devoid of warmth. Without your camera, and eventually your testimony, Rose might still be up there. And Lily, for that small mercy, I can acknowledge your role. But forgiveness? That's a mountain I'm not ready to climb. After Silas was led away, Harding turned to Clara. We're moving to arrest Serafina Thorne now. Mr. Vance's testimony, corroborating your account, and what we anticipate Rose will be able to tell us, gives us more than enough to charge her with first-degree murder of Liam Thorne and the attempted murder of yourself and Rose Thorne. What about Lily? Clara asked, a fresh wave of anxiety washing over her. Where is she? She's in a secure room with a child advocacy specialist. Serafina has been kept separate since the conflicting accounts emerged. We haven't allowed her contact with Lily pending investigation. A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse poked her head in. Mrs. Hawthorne, your granddaughter Rose is out of surgery. Everything went well. She's in recovery. You can see her soon." A small measure of relief eased the crushing weight on Clara's shoulders. "Thank you." "I need to join my colleagues," Harding said. "We're going to Serafina's room now to formally arrest her. Would you like to be present?" Clara considered for a moment, then nodded, a grim resolve hardening her features. "Yes. I need to look her in the eye." They walked down the corridor to another wing of the hospital. Outside, a room guarded by a uniformed officer, several police officials were gathered. They acknowledged Clara with respectful nods. "We're ready," the lead detective said. "Mrs. Hawthorne you can observe, but please allow us to handle this." Clara agreed. They entered. Serafina lay in the hospital bed, an IV in her arm, her expression turning to one of cold fury when she saw Clara. "Serafina Thorne," the detective began formally, "you are under arrest for the murder of Liam Thorne and the attempted murder of Clara Hawthorne and Rose Thorne. You have the right to remain silent." As the detective continued reading Sarah her rights, Clara watched the woman who had systematically destroyed her family. Sarah's face remained impassive, a carefully constructed mask of indifference, until the detective mentioned Silas Vance's detailed confession. "He's lying," Sarah spat, her voice venomous. "Silas was the one who... he was obsessed with me. He killed Liam because Liam found out." "Save it for your lawyer, Miss Thorne," the detective interrupted curtly. When he finished, Clara stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "Why, Sarah? Why would you do it? Liam loved you. He was a good husband, a good father." Sarah's expression twisted with a bitter resentment. "Good? Is that what you think? He was going to leave me? He'd been seeing someone. I know he had. He was talking to lawyers about changing the prenup, cutting me out. That hiking trip, it was supposed to be a reconciliation. But he kept denying everything, refusing to give her up. He snapped." "So you pushed him off a cliff?" Clara's voice was incredulous. "With your daughters? His daughters? Nearby?" "They weren't supposed to see," Sarah cried, a hint of desperation cracking her composure. "I told them to stay in the cabin." An officer placed handcuffs on Sarah's wrists, securing them to the bed rail. "You'll remain in custody here, Miss Thorne, until you're medically cleared for transport to the detention center." Sarah glared at Clara, her eyes filled with a chilling hatred. "This isn't over. It was over the moment you decided to murder my son," Clara replied, her voice cold as the mountain peaks. "You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, and you will never, ever see those girls again." Leaving Sarah under guard, Clara made her way back to the recovery area. Rose was stirring, her small leg encased in a bright blue cast from foot to mid-thigh. "Grandma Clara," she murmured groggily. "I'm here, sweetheart," Clara assured her, gently taking her hand. "The surgery went perfectly. You're going to be just fine." "Where's Lily?" Rose asked, her eyes still blurry with anesthesia. "She's here in the hospital too, safe. You'll see her very soon, I promise." Later that evening, after Rose was settled in a regular room and had fallen into a deep, medication-assisted sleep, Clara was granted permission to see Lily. The child was in a room down the hall, a kind-faced social worker sitting quietly in the corner. Lily looked up as Clara entered, her eyes wide and uncertain, so much like her sister, yet etched with a different kind of trauma, a weariness no 7-year-old should possess. "Hi, Lily. Bug," Clara said softly, approaching slowly. "Grandma Clara." The girl's voice trembled. "Where's Mommy? Where's Rose?" Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her heart aching. "Rose is in another room, resting. Her leg was hurt, but the doctors fixed it. She's going to be okay. And Mommy? Mommy is with some people who are trying to understand everything that happened on the mountain." She chose her words carefully. "For now, you and Rose are going to stay with me." Lily's lower lip quivered. "Daddy's not coming back, is he?" Mommy said he had an accident and got lost in the storm." The innocent question, based on Sarah's insidious lies, was another devastating blow. Clara felt her heart breaking all over again. "No, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Daddy isn't coming back, but he loved you and Rose very, very much, more than anything in this world, and I'm going to make sure you always, always remember that." Tears welled in Lily's eyes. Suddenly she launched herself into Clara's arms, sobs racking her small frame. Clara held her tightly, her own tears falling silently as she rocked her granddaughter, the immense weight of their shared loss, their shared future, settling upon her. As Lily's sobs gradually subsided into the even breathing of exhausted sleep, Clara continued to hold her, the moonlight filtering through the hospital window, casting soft shadows across the child's tear-stained face. She had lost her son, a wound that would bleed for the rest of her days. But his daughters, these precious, resilient little girls, remained. They were links to the man she had raised and adored, and they would need all her strength, all her love, now more than ever. Justice for Liam would grind its way through the courts. Sarah would face trial for her heinous crimes, Silas Vance for his part in the deceit. But the true justice, Clara knew, would be found in the quiet moments of healing, in the laughter she hoped to hear again, in ensuring that Lily and Rose grew up knowing they were cherished, protected, and defined not by their mother's darkness, but by their father's love and her own unwavering devotion. The path ahead was steep and treacherous, perhaps the most challenging trail of her life. But Clara Hawthorne had never shied away from a difficult journey. She would guide these girls, her girls, towards a new dawn,